In this session, we'll be testing the EasyConnect solution that we've configured on ISE in our lab. At this point, we've got ISE set up with the join point configured to support the passive ID integration with our Active Directory domain controller, and where passive ID is now allowed to investigate WMI logon events. And then ISE has also been set up with a new policy set for EasyConnect with very precise conditions for testing to allow access into the policy set itself, and then an authentication policy interacting with the internal endpoint database for MAC addresses and authorization rules in place to support passive ID tracking. Before we begin testing, let's modify our core PC and disable the wired autoconfig service so 8021X no longer occurs, using a local machine account for administration of this. And we'll set the wired autoconfig service to a manual start and stop the service. Before we leave here, let's document the MAC address of this core PC. And focusing on the last four characters, D550. And then we can remember that when we're looking at events in the live log. And then we'll restart the core PC. Going back to the admin PC, I've got a SSH session open to the 3K access switch. And here we'll go into the G101 interface and shut and then no shut this interface, and that will clear out any previous authorizations that were in place on there with respect to 8021X or what have you. So those will be completely removed. Okay, back on the core PC, it should be ready for logon now. And now we'll provide a domain account. We can go back and review the live log to see events related to this. Now, and we already see some updates with respect to the services running, and kind of stepping through. If you recall, D550 is the MAC address for our core PC endpoint. We've got a separate MAC address due to the virtualized environment our lab is in. We're seeing some interaction from that MAC, which we can disregard. And then, focusing, we can see that D550 matched the default rule within our EasyConnect policy. We provided AD access and then provided the host lookup access list to that. In this case, this is the NAD itself requesting the contents of that DACL. Then we're getting a little bit of a session update, and then we can see that ultimately we provided contractor access to that, and then a request for the DACL for contractor access. And then the rest of the interactions look like session update information and a little bit of interaction with that separate oddball MAC address. To view some more details, we can investigate context visibility endpoints. And we can see our D550 MAC address is currently authenticated. And we can see that it's been provided the contractor's authorization policy. We click on details on this MAC. And in particular, focusing on the passive ID service. And we can see that through passive ID interaction that we got the match to the domain group, passive ID groups that have been learned, and we provided and interacted and understood the passive ID username based on that interaction as contractor1. Another place where we can investigate results is on the 3K access switch. And we could see our D550 map MAC address is MAB authenticated. If we show details on this, we should be able to see that our core PC MAC address was provided the ACL Contractors DACL. Another place where we can investigate is on the Active Directory domain controller, which I had previously started, and we're looking at the event viewer and the security view within the event viewer, and I've got this filtered to look at only 4768 event IDs, which are Kerberos logon events. We'll do a refresh on this, and we should see a recent authentication, and we see that we've toggled that back and forth. The rest of the interactions are ISE attempting to interact with WMI. Okay, now let's go back to our core PC and we'll log out. In this case, understand that for EasyConnect and the EasyConnect solution, the switch user is not viable because we wouldn't be able to pick up that new logon event without that. And so we've logged off as contractor, and now we'll log on as employee 1. And we'll look at events related in the live log. We see the initial interactions with the employee where it went back to the default rule and generic AD access, and then got matched to the employee 1 logon and provided the employee access authorization profile. And ultimately, the NAD requested the contents of the DACL and provided that on behalf of the session itself. Alright, in quick review, we saw EasyConnect in action. Passive ID was a relatively new introduction, came about with ISE version 2.3, has made this integration with Windows much easier, much more reliable. We saw some of the basic components to put in place for doing some very precise testing with ISE in general, and overall saw passive ID. So now let's do a little bit of cleanup. This task is made pretty easy with our policy sets view, where we can simply disable this policy set and it will no longer be utilized or evaluated. And then on the core PC, let's reactivate the wired auto config service. Okay, so basically cleaned up and evaporated any possible impact of EasyConnect within our ISE deployment, and we're ready to move forward with our next session.